How do we forgive someone when it hurts, especially when it comes to being hurt in the church? And I can't tell you how many times, as someone who works with trauma, I get folks who feel stuck in their pain and possibly even become resentful. I think one of the things that we find is that the longer that we live, the more we're going to suffer. And that the end goal that God calls us to isn't to thicken our skin and to develop this sort of grit theology, it's to become resilient. And when we go through things, and I say this all the time, that God wants to take our misery and he wants to give us ministry for the things that we go through. Now, here's the thing, and you hear me say this all the time. If we don't allow God to give us a ministry for our misery becomes a mystery. We ask ourselves, why did I go through this? And I also want to say that one of the things that we sometimes don't give our selves permission to be able to even just question is, at times even being mad at God. I think some of us feel like there's no way that I could ever blame God for anything. And maybe that's true. I mean, to me, God is perfect, but it doesn't mean in the human experience that at times we aren't mad at God. And I'm really excited to have Mark DeJesus. He is a teacher, author, transformational consultant. He's going to be joining us to share from his book on overcoming bitterness. It's called Bitter Free: How to Forgive Anyone and How to Overcome Anger. And I actually found out about Mark as a fellow YouTuber. I go on YouTube and I look for ideas from people who are covering things in a very healthy way. And I found out about Mark one day. I think I found out about you when I was looking for OCD, and you covered something I'd never seen, which is salvation OCD and all the different spreads that we see, the different analogs of OCD. And I was immediately impressed, and I subscribed, and I have been getting video feeds from you ever since. And so without further ado, Mark, welcome to the channel, my brother.
Well, it's great to be here. It's great to talk to you. First of all, that was just an amazing segue into the subject that you just shared. But it is an honor that we've crossed paths. I think there's going to be some good things out of you and I connecting together. So I'm so happy to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I want to hear a little bit about is your conversion, very briefly. And then in terms of why you went into mental health as a Christian, tell us a little bit about your story.
Well, I grew up in the church. My earliest memory is the wooden church pew. And I said yes and signed up and said yes to Jesus when I was about 4 years old. Of course, I rededicated myself a bunch of times and all that, but grew up in the church and felt a sense of calling that I wanted to make a difference, and I wanted to get involved in God's work somehow in helping people. It led very quickly in my teenage years to doing a lot of involvement in ministries, and the pastoring, preaching and teaching started to flow out of me, where I really loved to communicate, and I really loved to share. And I was fascinated by other teachers who could relay concepts effectively. And so long story short, I went into pastoral ministry, starting as a youth pastor, then a music pastor, and then an associate pastor. And it was during that time, that latter stage, that it really started to bubble to the surface in very strong ways, a constant battle with anxiety, obsessive thinking. It would trail into struggles with depressing seasons. And I began to start going, something's wrong here. Something really, I need some help. And there's just a place of, one, recognizing that I've got some issues that need help. And two, realizing I've got to welcome some new learning, and I've got to be willing to work on some of these areas of my life. It led to a radical shift because I realized I needed heart healing. I needed to, there were things in my emotions and in my journey that were so neglected, that were never equipped. So I entered this whole new, I call it a personal renovation. You know, a lot of times we spend time chasing symptoms and we try to fix this thing and go back to my life. And I felt God was speaking to my life. This is a renovation. I want to go to the foundation. I want to go to the foundation of really helping you understand two particular things. One is the love of God and the grace of God. And growing up in church, it's amazing that I could be an adult who grew up in the church and I didn't know experientially in my heart have a real ownership of how much he loved me. and what his grace really meant towards me. So it set me on a path where I left that pastoral position. I started from scratch. And I said, you know what? I want to start documenting my journey, start teaching it to people, and whoever will listen. That was kind of my heart. God, bring in my path people that need what you've done in my life, and I will share what you've shared with me. That was an interesting prayer because it really, I felt opened up this grace of learning. And I felt myself just, journal after journal, like nonstop writing. And the scriptures came alive to me in a whole new way. So it set me on a path of valuing mental, emotional, relationship health in such a passionate way, and wanting that for the body of Christ, and really seeing this area of mental health is really something we all need work in our lives and need recognition of navigating that, because the heart of what the Gospels bring about is this journey of learning to connect with God, his love and his grace and his transformational work, but also working that out with each other. And growing up in the church, I saw a lot of that each other wasn't going very well, but we sure shoved it down, pushed it aside, and bless God, we're going to win souls. We kind of stayed on that journey. And I had a bit of a pulling back the curtain, and I, when you pastor, you see behind the scenes and you see what's really going on in people's lives. And I was like, why do we need to live in that kind of way? Why can't we live more authentically, where we all recognize we're all broken to some degree, and let's all graciously navigate this journey with each other, and by that love manifesting, right? God's power would shine through us and heal us. Sounds great, but it's hard work because you're dealing with the brokenness of people's lives, and with that, comes resentment and lash back. And I learned this thing where they'll often take the broken pains of their life and transpose it on you. And I was like, wait, I'm trying to help here. Whoa, hold on.
Yes.
So that it really came out of my personal realization of what I needed, and that I could not continue the typical pathway that I was on in my life. A lot needed to change. And so it led me on a new path that I will spend the rest of my life on, is helping people experience greater healing, greater freedom, and getting to the heart of what they struggle with, versus just chasing symptoms and just kind of doing Band-Aid work. It's like, let's get to the heart of healing people's lives. And with that, certainly there's all kinds of aspects of relational brokenness that are a part of how we see God and how we do life. So I could go on and on about that, but that's really began the heart of that journey, and it's led me to writing books. My commitment in my journey was video, audio, and written. I will spend the rest of my life using those three formats to just communicate healing truth that I've learned, that I've worked through my life and those I've helped, and let it be a blessing, whoever's willing to take it in.
Yeah, I really appreciate what you shared, and just in terms of the status quo wasn't working. One of the questions I ask as a therapist oftentimes to clients, and I always ask it in the most humble way. I'm very careful with this question. And the question is this: how's that working out? And through the years, I have consistently gotten honest answers. I mean, if you're humble when you ask that question. So I guess in some ways, as I ask that question, how was that working out? It wasn't.
Right.
What you were doing was not working. And that's kind of, as human beings, how we work, is when the pain of where we're at is greater than what we're getting from what we're getting. That's typically when we see change. And so for you, was there a signature event that said, I can't do it? I don't mean to put you on the spot, but sometimes it can be a moment of suicidality, or it can be a moment of I don't want to be here anymore, whatever. Did you have a breaking point, or did you not have to get to a breaking point before you were able to start transforming?
It usually takes a breaking point, and yes, it took a breaking point for me, where a part of the anxiety I battled with that moved into more regular panic attacks I didn't realize how much obsessive compulsiveness was a part of that. It took me quite a while to realize, typically people think of OCD as like just a cleanliness or order issue, or you're really neat, and it wasn't, even when I would first go to therapists or things like that. It was never even brought up. So I had a lot of obsessive compulsive tendencies that would keep me in these loops that would make me feel more tormented, more insane. Relationship OCD, it affected my dating life, just really, really hindered. I wanted to get married, but I had all these spin outs that would cause me to get close, break up, get close, break up, right? And I'm like, okay, something ain't right here, what I'm doing. And then constant anxiousness over public speaking. As a pastor, you're doing a lot of it. And I would have like full on panic attacks that I would be pacing in a room for hours, before giving a sermon. If you told me today, hey, Mark, I want you to speak, December 15th, from now until December 15th, I'd be every day at some level spinning about it. So there was a couple days that I remember. One of them, I was single. I had a roommate, and I remember sitting in my living room. And this actually is the first part of my chapter in a book I'm coming out about obsessive compulsiveness. And I remember just the darkness coming over me and this like absolute weariness of, I can't take this anymore. I don't know what to do. And I remember just getting out of the apartment and just walking down the street. It was the middle of winter in Connecticut. It was dark. The snow was there, and I'm trudging through the snow. And I called a friend of mine, one guy that I knew. He was a fellow pastor, and he loved on me, and he was so kind and gracious. He was always very supportive, but not necessarily knowing what to share or as far as like how to help, right? And so I appreciate the love. But then it led me to, okay, there's things I don't know that I need to know. And I can't emphasize this enough. When you do come to that place of humility where you go, all right, God, I don't know what I'm doing, and I need a renovation. It is amazing how God will bring people into your lives. I'm amazed at the amount of times people will go, I was there, it was 2:00 in the morning, and I was just like, God, and I went on YouTube, and there you were, Mark, and you said exactly, and it's like, that just blows my mind. But it also mirrors my experience, because then there was people that came into my life that would share and share maybe an area of healing in their life. And I would go, keep talking, keep talking. I'm listening. I'm listening. What did you, because my frequencies were open to learning now. Whereas before I was more like defensive, like emotions, I'm good. I'm good. Yeah. I'm good. I'm good. That's kind of the thing. It's a guy thing, Christian thing. I don't know what kind of thing. It's just a big defensive thing. Where it's like, I'm good. You're good. I'm good.
Absolutely.
And that changed when I was like, I can't do this anymore. That, like you said, how's life working? My answer would be like, not very good.
Yeah.
So that healing, it led me down many different pathways of people being brought into my life, or being exposed to certain teaching, or just a book, or an encounter with someone, or even a prayer moment where it would bring in things that I needed to learn at different stages of my journey. And I apply that to this day, where it's like layer after layer, God continues, because I just want to be an open funnel of learning. And I want to humble myself for that learning, to take it in. And so it's the sometimes in the breaking point, Christians can be notorious for kind of like, well, just suffer on in a way. We can be very notorious for that. Like, how's life going for you? Well, this. And it's just, well, just got to keep going. And I'm like, really? Just keep going like that? I think we need a divine pause to welcome what's the perspective I need to see. What's something, I kind of have a mentality of, if there's something I'm not seeing that I need to see, I need to open up myself to that. And if I feel stuck, and I use that language, I'm stuck, or I'm this, and just kind of like going in circles, it's revealing there's something I need to see that I'm not currently seeing. And so I just need to humble myself to be open. It's not somewhere out there over the rainbow. It's not some mystery of Indiana Jones that I got to, take 30,000 different steps over. It's usually right in front of us. We can't see it. And we got to position our hearts to receive it. So I can't emphasize humble yourself under the hand of God enough, because it leverages us for the learning. And to me, it took a while, because there are probably a lot of people that would be like, yeah, Mark's got some issues. Yeah. They may not know exactly what, but they'd like, yeah, he's got, you do a great job, doing a great job preaching, but you got to work on some stuff, bro. You know what I mean? And it took me a while for me to let myself see that and go, okay, all right, God, let's do the renovation. And I'll spend the rest of my life learning from that place.
It's interesting you talk about the Christian expectations. It's interesting, and I use this analogy when I'm out teaching and so forth, that when we are forgiven, God pulls out the log, and he spends the rest of our lives pulling out all those little splinters. And there's a lot of splinters in our lives. Some are about us, and some are about others. A childhood bully who strips you of your courage in front of your friends. Mm-hmm. Or maybe you missed out on what it's like to have your father's whiskers brush across your cheek. And then people become Christians, and we have unrealistic expectations about what's supposed to happen with the pain that we bring into that relationship with Jesus. And he has a plan for it. Again, God wants to give us some ministry for misery. But I love what you're saying, because in that, Mark, you're giving people permission to not be okay.
Right.
I think when people are forgiven, they feel like it's almost like, I feel like some people, it's if they address their pain, they feel like they're not somehow acknowledging the cross. Or that it's now a knock on Jesus. And if I'm forgiven, that's the same as healing. Well, actually, that's not what we see. Forgiveness actually comes, and healing takes longer. And so, anyway, I just love what you were saying with that. You can respond to that if you want, but I love where you're going.
That is definitely something that I bumped up against in talking to the previous generation, especially because when I found myself doing this heart emphasized healing of God as a father, doing a healing work in your life, I had probably the greatest resistance I had was in the previous generation, my parents' generation. And they carried a lot of shame regarding their history. So what they did with it was they confessed it to God, and they asked for forgiveness, and they took it in a nice, pretty, put a bow on it and locked it up deep down into the cellar of their heart. And so when I was talking about heart healing, this sense of shame rose up as though I was saying they weren't forgiven, and that it was hitting at that. And what I was inviting people into, this isn't just a thing about you being forgiven. It's about it being brought in a way where there's learning from your history and from your journey, where God can renew these areas because they're affecting you. And so when people would ask me, they'd say, does your past follow you? And I was like, well, I'm going to say yes, but the way that you're going to interpret it is that there's this haunting thing following you around, and God's going, I'm behind you as some angry person. It's really about what happened, like you mentioned, the bully. So that being bullied at that stage, that follows you. Now you're an adult and you're giving a presentation, and something happens, and you react out of that 8-year-old who was bullied in that moment. And so I found we weren't very good at dealing with our past, because it was like, I'm forgiven, right? So I had a couple sometimes I try to, you've seen my YouTube channel, I try to be playful and make jokes and try to lighten things up, because we get so super serious. And I'd have certain people be like, my past is under the blood. I said, awesome. If it's under the blood, then we can talk about it. Tell me about your journey, right? Because if it's under the blood, it's beautiful. It's a part of your story, and right? And I'm like, is it under the blood or is it under the carpet? Tell me which it is. But then the shame would come over, and like, I don't feel safe. And then they have a history of when I share, I'm condemned and accused, and it was like, okay, we got to reset the environment here. That this is about a gracious, loving Father who wants us as sons and daughters to approach him with confidence, knowing that he loves us. And so then I realized, okay, just that reference is stirring up stuff in people's lives. So I would say to people, tell me what you think of when you think of Father. What does that mean to you? Like, you use the example of a father's mustache or facial hair, rubbing across our cheek. I think a lot of listeners would be like, I have no idea what that is even like. So now I'm being introduced to a perfect Father who loves me, and it's kicking up all my Father references. So what do we typically do? We do what most Christians do. I start performing. I start doing for God. I start serving. I get busy, and we live in the buzz of busyness and got to make sure all my spiritual disciplines are in place. Then we're really uncomfortable with intimacy. We're uncomfortable because the reality is, like in my journey, I recognize I don't know what it's like to relate to you as a dad. And it's bringing up my history with that subject. And quite honestly, it's uncomfortable. And I'd rather find like a bunch of reasons to diminish that and push that away, because that's kind of frightening and that's hard work. So that's why we like a lot of times avoid these kind of things. But when I would teach, it brought up a lot of the shame. And so I realized, okay, as a part of this, we got to set the atmosphere of loving safety of who we're talking to, what we're dealing with here, so we can start really processing our issues in realizing we're safe with him and we can be safe with each other.
This is a great lead-in to why you decided to write your book, Bitter Free: How to Forgive Anyone, Resolve Conflict, and Overcome Anger. Why did you write this book?
A lot of it stems out of what I witnessed growing up in the church. This is just my perspective. This is what I saw. I saw that we were good at getting together, having our gatherings, and having our service-related activities that we were involved in. But there was a lot of undercurrent of bitter resentment and divided relationships where there was strife, there was envy, all kinds of stuff going on. But it was never really brought to a place of healing. And it didn't seem like it was emphasized. So I remember as a kid, kind of being conflicted, looking and going, wow, she's really angry. She all right? You're just kind of like, you're a kid, you're trying to formulate things. And then I saw church hurt impact my family and my parents. I remember a significant church split issue that went on. My parents were heavily involved in it, and we ended up leaving that church. I'm about 9 years old, I think, at the time. And I'm just kind of taking in, as kids, sometimes, the adults think we're just not seeing, we're taking in stuff. And I watched the pain, and then I watched how it impacted my parents, how it impacted people. And then when I went into church staff ministry work, I'd see just time after time where people would kind of, people that were respected people, maybe even elders, deacons, leaders, you get behind the scenes and you talk about, hey, how's so-and-so doing? Well, she's still alive, I guess. Or, wow. Or like these like statements of like, whoa, okay. Now, it's one thing to be resentful. It's another thing to be resentful and it's an untouchable area. Like, I just can't stand them, right? Or then I'd sit down with people and, hey, I want you to pray for, pray for me and help me. I feel God's called me to a ministry. And I think we're getting this, okay, sure. But I get a little bit more down to the fundamentals of like, how's your life? How's your relationship? So how's your marriage? How's things going with your husband? Oh, I can't stand him. So anyway, so I want to, I'm like, this is this is messing with me. I'm seeing two
Yeah.
worlds. I'm seeing two worlds here. There's a presentation, and behind the scenes, there's a lot of unhealed, relationship conflicts. We're not doing conflict very well. And we don't, I realize we don't even know how to do conflict. People either grew up with a lot of yelling, a lot of screaming over conflict, or they don't deal with anything at all, and their parents just get divorced 20 years later. It's like,
Yeah,
you know what I
buddy.
mean? It's like we don't have any reference of how to sit down and go, all right, I want to be quick to listen, slow to speak, slow to wrath. I want to humble myself. I want to hear you out. Work through navigating through that. So Bitter Free became a first, which it's gonna lend to future writings about how do we navigate this stuff? How do we navigate these pains? And I watched, there were seasons in my parents' life where, God bless them, but I was like, wow, there's some bitter roots getting in here. And it caused me to in some ways be on high alert, because I could see it wanting to like put a stranglehold on certain perspectives of how I saw people and how I would relate to people. And brought me back to the Hebrew writing of a bitter root and the work that it wants to do to be a pandemic, to be a viral plague that infects people very rapidly. It spreads very rapidly. So I found in a lot of my session work, if we're able to navigate a few things, we can actually be more equipped to have a more forgiving posture. It's not this like snap your fingers, make it happen, and all your problems go away, but it's a very, very large part of what it means to not let all the collateral pain that we carry not just hang on to us throughout our journey. And I just saw so many of us just carrying this excess baggage of unprocessed emotional pain and conflict. And one of the big ones that I've gotten into more over recent years is church hurt. And I know that you deal with that, you talk about that. And that's a significant place that has some interesting nuances to it that need to be addressed. And certainly, forgiveness, working through what we went through is a big part of that process.
Like, so for me, I had a situation happen earlier this year, and I remember kind of my forgiveness process, some of the turns that it took. I remember when I was able to make it more about the pain than the person. And that was a signature moment in my process. I still have some work to do because there was just a lot of trauma that I went through with that situation, with my family being threatened. But let me be very, very, very specific as it relates to the challenges of my audience. My audience is many of my people, were called into more of a church atmosphere that was very focused on evangelism, which evangelism, seeking and saving the lost, and really the technical is what was lost, but what the lost is something that God is passionate about. But when you make people play a numbers game and then they just become a piece on the board, that doesn't work out well, and it injures a lot of people. When you're obsessed over growing your church as it relates to numbers, it damages people. It does. And we are still dealing with that, even to this day. Discipling relationships. So a hierarchical relationship with someone, when it comes to spiritual formation, can go bad. I think about the Stanford experiments and so forth. Like when you put people in authority and they have unresolved issues, to your point earlier, those issues come out and project themselves. Dating. I did a video on purity culture. It's one of my most popular videos. When you think about purity culture, and we have had, at least in our situation, I can only speak for us, rules around dating. In other words, the exclusivity, which kind of goes into the next issue, which is in our situation, and I know I'm being very specific, but I'm not going to not be thorough. People, there's an exclusivity to being a part of certain fellowships where you are the only ones who are saved. And there develops, it's kind of like that there's kind of these tendencies to communicate elitism through your fellowship tendencies. So dating people, controlling who you can go on dates with, these types of things, moving people around. We really want to grow churches, so what we're going to do is we're going to take people from an environment where they're functioning, and we're going to pull them into another environment and uproot them over and over and over and over and over and over again. Judgmentalism, toxic leadership. We still have this. Again, when you get personalities that can get you production and numbers, there can be a culture that develops that injures people, and it's hard to hold accountable because you're dealing with people at the top. Now, some of you are probably very triggered by what I just said because I was specific and you feel like I'm hating on what God is doing. Okay, I need you to hear where I'm coming from that perspective. I'm not trying to blast anyone. I'm simply saying I'm not going to ignore the specific traumas that I consistently have people write about. And yes, they may have happened 20 years ago or 30 years ago, but trauma is a distinct type of suffering that has incredibly durable effects. That's why I say this, Mark. I hate to go on my soapbox, but I wanted to ask you, because there's people who really need that. They really need that advocacy, that visible advocacy. And for some people, it doesn't go far enough. And for you guys who that doesn't go far enough, I can't do anything about that. I'm going to draw a boundary with those of us who think that, I can do more or whatever. So anyway, how do you address church hurt specifically when it comes to legalism? Because everything I've just painted is a picture of legalism, a system, a structure of legalism, not grace, but legalism, and legalism that continues to persist. How can we call people to heal from bitterness in those situations?
Yeah, there's a bunch of different avenues we could go through, and I sense your passion on it, and I share that passion because I witnessed the influence of what legalism and its influence did to my life and my journey. Because when we talk about legalism, we usually think about certain aspects that are very overt. We don't always see the subtle aspects of it. I think it's important that we always remember it's a leaven that wants to take the whole thing, and it spreads, and you give it a little bit of room, it'll keep going. And so I was raised under that, and then I was reproducing that. And there's a form of this influence that combines with what I call performance-driven Christianity, which is we've developed this machine that matches the modern business corporate structure, right? That it's like, we got to go after the numbers. So the thing is that success equals big numbers, big budgets, big influence. You become like Walmart, you become like Amazon, you become like that, right? The problem is, when you go after that, everything comes under the mercy of that, including authentic relationships, humble relationships. You see, people are messy. We're all messy. So we don't follow this perfect algorithm as we're coming to Christ and following this journey. There's all kinds of goofiness and woundedness and perspectives that we're carrying. That takes time. Shepherding takes time to pause. It takes time to sit down, to work through. Jesus modeled this in his interaction, his pace at times, and the way that he would interact and withdraw was frustrating, even to their time. I think he would drive our modern culture absolutely bonkers because of our rate of how we do relationship and how we do things. So we have this speed of light we're trying to move at to build these big things that we're doing, big buildings, big stuff. So everyone becomes a commodity under that. Now, this is just, I'm just being honest. That's as somebody who's seen it and lived in it, and just and working through what I saw and what I was even, pushing in my life. You have that, our unhealed brokenness, and then what legalism does is becomes like an easy, quick shortcut to the system, right? Because I got to move things fast. We don't have time to work through, okay, your trauma as a kid is now influencing your struggle to connect to God. So we go, if you just read your Bible more, you wouldn't have these issues. Wow. And we post it on Instagram and people go, yeah, people would just read their Bible. You're right. So it becomes a very shallow thing, but yet it is, it doesn't really get to the heart of what that person's struggling with. And quite honestly, we don't have time. Get on board or get out. Right. And so then it becomes that but the problem is once you serve the machine of performance-driven culture, it takes over and it becomes God. It becomes the thing that drives everything. So as a pastor, you don't have time for people and you don't have time to deal with your own stuff, let alone your own family. So families get neglected. Then kids are getting neglected. And then we're kind of like scratching our heads like, why'd the pastor have an alcohol problem all of a sudden? Why'd they get it? Why'd they get it? We're always doing that. We're always like, why is it? I'm like, folks, if I lived that lifestyle, I would have the same problems. Oh my goodness. This is a whole structure that we keep feeding, we keep serving. That what we need to do is bring the RPMs down and make room for relationship in a deeper way. But that confronts our brokenness. So a lot of legalism. I believe what fueled a lot of the legalism that we look at, like, for example, with the Pharisees, was their resistance to dealing with their hearts. Jesus, when he announced the gospel, he announced the gospel in a way that we don't typically emphasize. He said, "The Spirit of the Lord God is upon me because He's anointed me to heal the broken heart, to bind up the broken wounds, to set at liberty those who are bound." He quotes Isaiah, right? And it's really, that's the announcement of what the gospel's bringing. It's like, we're going to heal this. It's not about being brokenheaded. It's brokenhearted. It's our relationship wounds, right? It's the bondage. I'm here to lead you on a journey. In Luke's gospel, the religious people got so upset. It says they were trying to figure out how to throw him off a cliff. Like, talk about like going 0 to 60. He hit at the root problem. What it was, their hearts needed healing. They created this system that kept kind of a self-righteous, I don't really have to deal. So then out of that, I control. Why do I control people? Because I'm afraid and I'm insecure. Why do I get angry and yell and lose my cool when this happens? It's because of my relational wounded history. It's right. But I'm not going to deal with that. And I'll come up with these biblical frameworks that I can use to just kind of tell people, just read your Bible, just pray more. Because really what we're saying is, I don't know what to tell you. And I don't know that I even have time. And I'm not even really working on myself. So, you know what? If you just start thinking right and just act right, start acting saved. And so then it creates, we're inventing all forms of, dysfunction coming out of that, where you talked about, my church is better than yours. We're the saved. And that lends to, bona fide cults and what I would, call cult-like activity, which is just, it can get there very easily, very, very easily. One of the things I realized, I stepped out of a church that was a growing, larger church in our area as far as numbers. And when I made that decision, I wanted to go on a new journey. I left all that. And one of the things that I realized when I left that, because sometimes you got to get out of it to like think differently. And I realized how big God is, how much He's working in so many areas. I was stuck in this, like, what God's doing here. I couldn't even see outside of our little controlled world of what we were focused in on. It was very humbling to see what God was doing in a lot of different areas and a lot of different ways all around the world. And unfortunately, as I stepped out, I discovered the grace of God when I stepped out. And that's just my journey. I didn't discover it in. I had to step out to discover his grace. And that was very eye-opening to me. And so so in that process, I realized we've been blocked from grace so much because grace is harder work. I gotta deal with my heart. I gotta deal with how I, it's like with you're a dad. I'm a dad. Yeah. If my kid's fussing, it's easier to just go, stop playing with your sister's hair and just sit down and be quiet, rather than pausing, going, hey man, what's going on? You all right? Grace is beautiful, but it's work of the heart. It requires us to. Grace requires that I realize I've got issues just as well. Grace requires that as I look at Phariseeism and legalism, I've got stuff. I've got shreds of that still in me that I'm working out, and I'm healing through. Who am I to say that I'm all that I don't have that in my life, and I can call it out in others and not realize it in myself? So, the healing from legalism though is very, very challenging because it has an echo that follows us. And if I could kind of take it to another thought, Kyle, if that's all right, yeah. I actually believe that church trauma can at times be more challenging to navigate than even family upbringing trauma. And that's big. That's big, because most of our stuff trails back to mom, dad, home upbringing, right? But church family has a family orientation to it, but it's also our faith grid. We share things in church culture. I've shared things in church culture I never told my parents. I've shared things with brothers and sisters I've never told a family member, right? I've been vulnerable in ways in the body of Christ I'd never have anywhere else. So to then have pain that where you've seen the abusive side, or you've seen the legalism used in a way it's abusive. It leaves an effect of residue that to me has a toxic world of its own, because it combines the faith grid I invested into, the vulnerability I had, and the sense of family. Because let's be honest, a lot of us found family connection in church that we didn't have at home. And we found it there. And in fact, people who realize, well, I was a part of a cult, I didn't know it was a cult, or a spiritually abusive ministry or church. What the vulnerability was, he feels like a dad to me. She feels like a mom to me. He feels like a brother. She feels like a sister. It feels that thing that we didn't necessarily have in our upbringing, or was broken. And so now, not only are we healing from our upbringing, we're healing from something that came in and misused that role and lived out of their own brokenness. And it leaves, I find, walking away, I found myself, because I came out of ministries I was friends and connected to that ended up being traumatic experiences of significant betrayal and accusation, and it left me in a chaotic spinning where the inner condemning critic got amplified, because it took areas of faith and just took the letter of the law to it. And now it's inflaming obsessive compulsiveness for me, because it hit that perfectionistic tendency. I got to make sure I do the right thing. Mark makes sure he does the right thing. In all things, make sure you do the right thing. I'm a pastor. I'm a minister. I got to make sure I do the right thing. And the end product, which it seems like is a big part of trauma, is it made me an enemy to myself. Where now I approach life as my own worst enemy. I might be mad at God, I might be mad at this person, but at the end of the day, when I put my head on the pillow, I am an absolute enemy to myself and battling myself at every turn. I'm so tired. I'm so weary. And yeah, you need to get it together. What's wrong with you? You got things to do. Move on, get over it. Right. Just inflaming that voice. And now I'm further sticking a knife into the wound as I'm just in a war of self-hate and shame, self-rejecting, divided with myself. And I think that most traumatized people have a sense of feeling divided amongst themselves. And part of it is this sense of disdain they have towards themselves. It's come out of what they experience, right? There's this thing that we do relationally where if we have animosity towards somebody, a typical thing we do is we back away, right? And sometimes it's a protective mechanism. It's we're projecting rejection, or we're sensing something. It can be a form of hate where where I'm withdrawing love. So now in the absence of love, hate comes in. And what I find is, boy, we really do that to ourselves.
Absolutely.
And we withdraw from ourselves. So now I can't even look in the mirror. Now I'm putting on weight because I'm stress eating, coming out of what I've been through, and now I'm hating myself, can't look in the mirror because of what I see. Now I'm overweight. So it's just this whole cycle that I'm stuck in.
Have you found, and I've got several things I want to comment on, but really quickly, have you found that as someone who's trying to be helpful to people who hate themselves, that at times as you engage them with love and compassion, or you're doing the best you can, that because of where they are, and they have a lot of things they don't want, and they have a lot of things that they can't get that they do want, that at times that they end up lashing out at the people that are closest to them?
Yeah, for sure. For sure. It is. And from my experience, it is one of the manifestations of self-hate, what I'm cultivating inside of me, that out of response to what I've been through and how I'm coping. When you get near it, it's gonna hit you. Yeah, you get a feel from that. I had to learn even that in my compassion work, that it's like what's coming out right now. It's not about me. It's about what's going on within the person. I got to be aware of me and how I'm navigating this as well. But there is we do a lot of relationship out of self-hate, and self-hate I find gets inflamed, stemming out of abuse. But there's an aspect of abuse that we don't always put our finger on, and it's the abuse of neglect. When you deal with trauma and complex trauma, and you see if you were to hit me with something on my arm and it was to leave a bruise, I see it. I can recognize what you said, or somebody said to me that wasn't nice, or this thing, I could recognize that, or maybe if you did this. But when something was needed that I needed but wasn't there, I didn't even know I needed it. And I'm carrying the brokenness of neglect, of an emotional need that needed to be filled. And I find that can really, really just amplify a sense of self-hate, because I don't know how to acknowledge the emotions that are going on with me and see them with compassion.
Right.
And so there's this combustion going on inside. It's just a fiery inferno within. And it increases stress levels. I snap at people. I respond a certain way. I get very, very defensive. And confronting that was an important part of my healing from my upbringing, but also from church hurt, because I was like, okay, I don't want to respond to this by doing something wrong and acting out towards them. So I would just bottle up this whole thing inside of me. And that led me to being an intense enemy, to myself, and prevented me from being able to heal in the process.
So I want to talk about forgiveness now, but before I do that, I want to go back to a comment that you made about pastors and kind of how that projection process happens. There's a Barna research. It's the Healing Trauma Institute, the official institute, and they partnered with Barna. And here's what they found: when it comes to current or recent trauma, ministers tend to score the lowest. This is of 2019. My guess is it's different now. But current and recent trauma, ministers score the lowest as it relates to practicing Christians, non practicing Christians, non Christians. They score the lowest. Where ministers score the highest is when it comes to previous trauma. I want you to think about that for a moment. Ministers lead all groups as it relates to childhood trauma. I think that's profound, number one. I'm going to say something that I mean, obviously, I say a lot of controversial things, but some people will really take probably offense to what I'm about to say. But I'm going to say it from the standpoint of how's that working out. I think for certain people to stay where you're at in your spiritual faith setting will be one of the worst decisions you'll ever make. You're not happy, you're not growing, you're bitter, and you're hoping that the environment will transform into something that will meet your heart's desire. And for some of us, it's not going to happen. No one's ever going to give you permission to leave a harmful environment. It's harmful because it's controlling. So for some of us, to stay will be the worst decision you will ever make. For others of us, here's a both and. This is a great example to teach both and. For others of us, leaving will be the worst decision you will ever make. Because for me, when I look at problems, I don't believe in less problems, I believe in different problems for certain people. The grass isn't greener on the other side, the grass is greener where you water it. So for me, when I think of certain people, it's time to go. We have to be careful not to get too attached to the various seasons of our lives. Can you imagine if Joseph would have said, "Oh, I've been a prison warden. That's all I know. I think I'll do that instead of becoming prime minister," right? So, and then others of us, God might be saying, don't give God a deadline of how much longer you're going to be faithful, right? It's not one answer for each context. And I just want to say, like I would tell anybody, if you are in a harmful situation where you are being abused, leave. Please leave. And you're a great use case example for this, Mark. I'm not saying you were being abused, but you left and you grew. And I think sometimes what the power structure does is it controls the narrative about what happens to people who leave. You know, it's interesting what would happen if certain churches would say, you know what? Certain people leave and do better. Certain people leave and heal, and they still love God, and we don't control all of that. Right? But that's one of the things I find is the permission is never going to come, guys. And I need you to hear that. No one's ever going to give you the green light. You're going to have to be led by God's Spirit. And that's the person who converts us anyway. That's the person who gets us home anyway. Regardless, here's let me give you a working definition and you tell me if you think this works or not. And if it doesn't work, I want you to be completely honest with me. Oftentimes I tell people there's a difference between a stubborn heart and a stubborn wound. Stubborn heart is just we don't want to do it God's way. It's just that simple. I have a stubborn heart with certain things. Okay? Like he was saying with the Pharisees, they did not want Jesus as their rabbi. They didn't want to interpret the law way that he interpreted the law. Okay? Stubborn wound is not the same thing as a stubborn heart. And I find that in many instances where there is religious rigidity, you find that people get blamed for their wound. And then what happens is when people have a stubborn wound, we basically say they have a stubborn heart. There's a difference. Wounds are pesky, right? And I think to some degree in the church, upper leadership has struggled to identify the difference between a stubborn heart and a stubborn wound. Has that been a little bit of your experience?
It's really, really good statements you're saying there. Gets me thinking. Yeah, I think that the stubborn heart diagnosis, because we tend to diagnose people, we call it discernment. You know, we do it very, very, very shallow, very like, well, this is your problem. This is what you need. We're very quick to that. When you're more heart aware, first of all, of your own life, you're less quick to judge, less quick to just assess. You're taking it in. It's like you mentioned people that have a hard time leaving their church or fellowship or community, and then there's some who need to stay. I remember the people that I would call church hoppers, right? They were the people that they would go from place to place to place, and they would never really root themselves. And I'll just be honest, it would just kind of like annoying in the sense like, where are you? What are you doing? And, I would just write them off as church hoppers. Now, being more aware of my own journey and how things affect us, it realized a lot of these people are very traumatized people that are just living in constant hypervigilance that's actually preventing them. And they're in that stubborn wound in the sense of they've never had the ability to or the opportunity or whatever to get some insight to what's going on, to why they do what they do. Or people that maybe are afraid to, step out and leave. I've seen that so much, where Christians say, well, when the Lord leads me, I'm going to go. And I'm like, they're waiting for wind to blow. They're waiting for a sign. They're waiting for a telegram. They're waiting for this emotional movement, but, their attachment issues, their maybe codependency, or just their woundedness has them tied to something that they can't see and be able to even assess and see it for what it is. So I think that when we slow down and start to be more heart aware of why do we do the things that we do, why does this person, every time I'm around this person, they just over talk, they just keep talking, and do we ever pause and go, what's their journey been like? Because I bet if I had that guy's childhood, I'd be over talking too. It puts things in a different, a different perspective. And that's what I see in what you're sharing is it goes more to heart diagnostics of like, this is what's really going on, versus, just seeing things. Oh, you just got a stubborn heart. You just got a hard heart, or were you just this? We tend to like that shortcut because it puts a label on something to make sense,
Right.
so we don't have to. Right. We don't have to deal with it anymore, right? Oh, she's just got a lot of issues, Okay, so I got a lot of issues. It's 15 years later. Has anyone ever sat down with her and navigated those issues? We just put it in a thing we can label and put it away and not have to navigate the harder work of tell me what life has been like. So we don't just wake up and all of a sudden do these things. They have a history in our life. They have a history in our journey. And so it brings me back to the relational component. I realized in such greater clarity was like, I need relationship healing. And it's not just me and God, it's me and God and you. I need to learn in how I interact with you. There's healing available here. Even in this conversation, there are things you're saying that are adding value to my life. And we're now living out an opportunity for right now. I could be experiencing just a smidgen of healing from some of my tough moments in life, from some of my perceptions that I might be still be carrying. In this exchange, I'm open to letting that happen. And in that God manifests himself, right? Mm-hmm. So I think that there's some things you said there too that I'm gonna think on some more, because it's powerful, your observation.
Yeah, I guess when it comes to forgiveness, and this is if you're a minister, I want to, Mark and I want to just include you in the concern. I partner with ministers. I don't believe that ministers are the enemy for me. I believe toxic structure is the enemy, right? Sometimes, like in marriage and family therapy, we call it externalizing the problem. When you don't know how to make the problem, we end up making people the problem, which is kind of what you just shared a moment ago. But ministers, I want to help them heal. I invest time and energy into going and doing workshops and conferences to help ministers address their trauma. I think to some degree, ministers just kind of, some of them just feel like, okay, how do we help people move forward? I think there's a lot of good ministers out there. Again, both and. Some people, when you're hearing this, it's hard to hear the both and. And Mark, I really want to get your insight on how to help people hold that a little better. But forgiveness isn't an event. It's got to be a process. And I think sometimes, like we can take Matthew 8, you can take different scriptures that talk, hey, leave your gift at the altar, go and be reconciled. I think sometimes we don't see that reconciliation is a process. We want it to be an event. And so I think God is very serious about, the process is the shortcut. In my life, it's always been the shortcut, and the shortcut is the process. And when we avoid the process, it always takes longer. And so reconciliation is, and I'll just say this, forgiveness or closure. When I teach forgiveness and closure and reconciliation, I teach it separately. I say closure is about me, reconciliation is about we. And sometimes I think what people want is they want reconciliation and they think they're going to get closure through doing reconciliation. Sometimes reconciliation is not possible. You're never going to be able to have that conversation. You're never going to get your pain acknowledged by the person who damaged you. And somehow we have to get closure, or we will have lives that are controlled by pain. So my question to you, what are some ways that those listening right now who want to start the forgiveness process, what are their initial steps?
I think that what you shared about forgiveness being a process and a journey is very, very true. It's there's layers to it. There's aspects of things we begin to realize. I found with forgiveness, I have two kind of categories, not to try to categorize everybody, but two areas that I've noticed. One is the people that are not even willing to recognize they have forgiveness issues. Like I told you before, they just, they're just like, they can't stand their spouse. They can't stand that person. And they just hold it. Bless God, but I can't stand them. And they just kind of live in that world. Then there's those that they understand forgiveness. They, in the sense of like, it's important, but they rush to it so quickly. They give themselves zero room to actually process through things. And I found myself in that at stages of my life where I was like, I got to forgive. I just got to let it go. I pray through. Okay, got to forgive them. And really I was avoiding the journey of working through the pain, grieving, because grieving is a big part of leaving spiritually abusive environments, healing, from trauma. There's the grieving stage, and perfectionists are always avoiding the grieving stage or even acknowledging emotion. So they live in and religious perfectionism can be a very big byproduct of being under legalism. We reproduce that kind of lifestyle and kind of way of relating to God and pain. It's just like, I got to quickly get over this, and just move on, and it's all locked up. And then we're wondering why is Pastor so-and-so having these anger fits, and all that. So I think that being able, what makes it helpful, I find, is creating a sense of how we relate to ourselves and giving permission that it's okay to work through feelings, work through emotions. I find that I've had to learn in my journey, many people I've helped, how to be more compassionate towards myself. I go back to that, being an enemy to myself. When I'm more compassionate about what I've been through, it gives me space to go, all right, it's okay that I'm not okay.
Right.
This will heal in time. It'll take as long as it takes, is a saying that I say, because that applies the patience of God's love. I'm a big believer in love is patient, love is kind. I believe that they're pillars of love, because kindness is what love gives out. Patience is what love can handle, right?
Wow.
And when I apply that to myself, kindness is how I talk to myself. Patience is how I handle what I'm going through and where I'm at. So you've left the church, it's a year later, and you're still kind of like spinning through. When we welcome kindness and we welcome patience, we now see those people out of what we're cultivating within. So I find some of the most hostile people to me in my journey, I can look at with greater compassion, actually wish them well, even wherever they are in their life and their journey. Does it mean we're going to be best friends? Does it mean we're going to hang out? Does it mean that, that we have to be around each other? I found that as I'm letting that work of God's tender compassion have a work, that forgiveness has such a beautiful connection to love. And maybe some of your listeners are manifesting struggles that look like a lack of forgiveness and could be, and maybe there's a struggle in being able to forgive themselves, because we walk away from pain with such shame, and out of shame we blame. We get angry at God, we blame those people, but really at the end of the day, we're shooting those arrows at ourselves. And so I find that when I deal with how I'm interacting with myself, how I approach you dramatically changes. And now it's I'm less self-protective. I'm more apt to let things go. I'm more gracious because I see things in me that I go, yeah, thank God I have grace, and I want to give that to you. It makes me more reasonable now when I'm interacting with people that are maybe, challenging. It's like, okay, come now, let us reason together, kind of approach. So I think that it needs to be a process, and it's a journey of learning how to engage God's gracious compassion towards us in it. He is wanting to be ever present in those places, but I've got to learn. And I've been on this long arc in my journey, and I'm inviting others to join in with me of this learning that I never want to present myself because many Christians are like, so how did you get your full healing? Like, full healing?
Yeah.
Like,
no way.
Like, what does that even mean?
Yeah.
Like, and I step back and go, what did we do to get people to think that way? What have we been teaching that makes it that? It's just like, I am just, So I'm on this journey, and I'm inviting people with me, and at each level and each stage, I learn to flex those forgiveness muscles, and I found just great fruit in learning how to cultivate a sense of kindness towards myself, because that's what comes out. When I operate out of self-hate, it's going to infect how I see other people. There's this passage of scripture where Paul's talking about marriage. He says, a man who loves his wife loves himself. There's so many different meanings we can pull out of that, but I'll just kind of just take it straight. I have found it to be true that the more I learn to apply love to myself the way that God loves me and see myself, it dramatically impacts my ability to be kind, patient, loving, gracious to my wife and to my children. And so that's really where I start is how am I seeing myself in this journey? Because if I'm seeing myself through shame and through condemnation and all this self stuff, then it's just gonna that irritable that's just gonna pour out, and and these people too, and while we're at it, all those people that wounded me too, we just start stacking the decks, and and it really goes back to I need to cultivate within me how God sees me, and I'm so grateful that there were times I acted as a Pharisee. And he's patient with me in my journey and merciful. There's times in my pastoral work, I let anger take over. I let defensiveness take over. I let the I'm right, you're wrong.com take over kind of mindset, that and I'm so grateful that he was patient with me in that process. So as I cultivate that, it then leads into how I see other people. The language of love, we will spend the rest of our lives discovering the depth and breadth of what love looks like in a given situation. And it's incredibly powerful. And that's what made Jesus in a moment be able to pivot, where he's looking at a situation and he would say this. And people are like, oh, okay, that's people around him probably like, okay, write that down. We should say that to people. And then he'd never say that again. And he would deal with this person and deal with a totally different thing, right? It's like he's writing in the sand. He's spitting in their eyes. He's walking away. He's saying nothing. He's saying, let the dead bury the dead. Like, what is with this guy? Because he's in the moment of what gracious love sees and says what's needed then, right? We're broken people that are learning to navigate that. And so So the more I recognize what he's given me, the more forgiving. It's one of the takeaways. Like Matthew 18 is it could be one example. That debt that he's forgiven, and how quickly we go out and forget what we were forgiven of, or forget the graciousness that's available to us. I want to treasure that. Legalism stole my ability to see the beauty of grace, to see the treasure that it is, how amazing it changes my life when I realize what he did for me and how that can impact my life. I was occluded from that for so long. And now I'm seeing the brilliance of it. It's not cheap. It's not a license to sin. It's not all the stuff people say. It's absolutely amazing. And now I treasure that. And so I want to treasure that with people. It's harder work in that it's heart work. You got to grieve through pain. You've got to grieve sometimes what you see in other people who don't make great decisions, or you have to be patient with other people's journeys and where they're at. It's a whole different ball game, but it's the greater way. It's the more excellent way Paul talked about when he said there's nothing greater than love. Nothing.
You talk about me giving you some things to think about. I feel like, oh my goodness. I mean, it's interesting. I feel like I could have literally gone and just watched one of your videos and just been blown away. I just got to be in one of your videos in a way. And so I'm just so grateful for what you're sharing. And it to be honest with you, bro, you really are presenting a safe space, a safe harbor for those of us who have been controlled by legalism. And, I'll be honest, there's some parts of me that I just, if I'm being completely honest, Mark, are just fractured. I mean, as you were talking, I would say most of this interview I felt pretty triggered, just because, I still feel called to do my part, but I consistently find that in the public sphere, it's just never enough. And the reality is I went to a training once, and this woman said, she was teaching us on how to help with really just deep trauma. And she said, your clients will need more than you will ever be able to give them. Ever. I mean, people need more than you can ever give them. And so just understanding that craving, that longing in people, I think it kind of gives me permission to not have to have all the answers or be the person or whatever. And I was just kind of thinking about this even today, Mark, I think what's been hard for me is that when you deal with people who are so damaged, they don't know how to be a container for their stress. And so what happens is we find people who are willing to be a container for our anxiety and our depression. And people with bad boundaries, people with pleaser natures like myself, sign up to be containers for people's stress. And I think it's really important for me. I kind of just, as you were talking, I feel like the Spirit's just leading me, son, you need to set some boundaries. Because, those of us that are in the caring professions and so forth like that, I just think sometimes we can have the worst boundaries. People who are in ministry positions, we just have horrible boundaries and we own it. And it's not about us. And so I think we make a mistake when we make it about us. I just have to work through it. I need to work through it. So I just thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to say? Real quick, before you say anything as far as your website, YouTube, the book we mentioned that you guys can pick up, it'll all be in the description, whether you're on podcast, YouTube, whatever. I'll make sure I put all of his details in the description. That way you guys can reach out or whatever it may be. So you said you got another upcoming book coming out. Is there any other announcements you'd like to make us aware of?
If anybody wants to find out what I do, markdejesus.com, markdejesus.com. And they can find out anything about my blog posts, my videos. I do a lot on YouTube, so they can find me on YouTube. And I really enjoy doing Q&As and just having fun, just giving feedback with people's questions and try to get to the heart of the matter. And I do have a book. I'm not sure exactly, probably beginning of 2023. Lord willing, the creek don't rise, on obsessive compulsive, getting to the heart of our obsessions and compulsions. That's been a big part of my journey, been a big part of what has helped me a lot. And I've been helping others a lot in that area. So that's going to be coming up with my wife and I. We do podcast episodes together too. It's all on that same YouTube page. We try to have conversations reflecting our journey, and tell stories and just navigate through what is it like in our own healing as we're helping others, as we're raising a family, as we're just navigating things that are important to us. But Kyle, there's something you said. If there's anything I want to say,
Yeah.
I want to say this. I really appreciate how you have positioned yourself as somebody who is authentically sharing that you're going through your own healing journey. You know, as I was sitting there listening to you, you're incredibly smart. You're very articulate. You have a wealth of knowledge and understanding, but you have heart there. That's awesome. And it's very refreshing that you position yourself in a way of, hey, I'm navigating this journey and I'm here to be a help. And I'm working through these issues. I find that to be such a beautiful sweet spot to be in. My history tells me I've got to be on point. I got to know everything. I got to make sure, you know, and that voice comes along often in many different forms, in many different ways. I related to everything you shared about the pleasers and the container. And I remember just this mindset of like, I got to show up and just be the answer in this situation, this intense pressure. And then when I navigated more into the rest of letting that go of like, no, I'm working through this too. And I'm in the trenches. And I think that there's a beautiful, authentic ministry that's flowing out of that. And I think that you are even in some ways pastoring people, even though that when I use the word pastoring, it's shepherding, you know, which a lot of times pastors are more, you know, CEOs or presenters or teachers or management kind of leaders. You know, shepherding is like you sit down and talk. There's connection. There's care going on. There's a relationship that's being exchanged. And I think that if we can raise up people that will cultivate that in their own world, I think there's going to be some powerful church stuff happening where they just kind of stumble into relationship with each other and they help one another out. And they're manifesting the heart of Christ in edifying each other and being healing vessels to each other. So I really appreciate that there's a graciousness and a real heart connection to when you talk and when you share. It's there's a lot of smart clinicians out there, you know, some intimidating, you know, like good grief, look at the things they know, right? But what changes people's lives is not how much information we've accumulated. It's the ability to land into someone's life and relate heart to heart and share. And so I appreciate your way about that and just, you know, sitting down with you today and being able to talk. It's awesome. So keep it up. And I look forward to hearing great reports about what people get out of what you share.
Amen. I feel incredibly affirmed and encouraged. And I mean that, brother, it for many reasons. And so I just thank you for allowing God to speak to you, to speak to me, because there's parts of me that just need to hear truth and encouragement. I need that. And so thank you for that. And it means a lot coming from you because I look up to you in terms of the YouTube world and all of that. And in terms of Christian ministry virtually, it's super affirming. So I want to affirm you with my blessing that I offer to all of my guests at the end of my video, that we are with you and God is for you. Mark, thank you. Thank you for coming on the discussion today, brother.
Thank you very much. It was a real honor. It really was. I enjoyed it too. It was fun.
Absolutely. Well, if you've been with us through the entire video, this is a long one. I'm at clocked it at an hour and 20 minutes or whatever. I just want to thank you for listening all the way through. I hope it was beneficial for you. Again, all of Mark's information will be in the description. I'll see you next time.